There we go.
Hello.
Hey, Stephanie, good to see you. How are you doing today?
Fine. Not -4 here. Less freezing than Sarah, but still pretty cold.
Yeah, I think some of us have more reason to gripe than others when it comes to the weather. It's a good thing we don't have to gripe quite as much. Now, your talk here is called "Fix It Later, No Thanks: Designing for Accessibility Right from the Start." And now this is a perfect bridge from uh, from uh, from the last talk, and I'm really excited to hear about it, because I think you're about to school us all with actionable things that we can use right away in our work. Not just only actionable, but strategic, in the sense that we can save ourselves tough fixes in the future. Now, I know that everyone is just as eager as me to hear what you have to say, so I'm going to step right aside and hand the stage over to you. So I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you. Let me just make this small. Okay, hi everyone. Stephanie Walter, and I'm talking today about accessibility for designer. And the cool thing is that I'm going to repeat some of the things Sarah just said. So teaching is about repeating things until like it clicks. So I hope that by rehearing some of the stuff, it will help you understand a little bit more as well. Where is the clicker that okay, clicker. So yeah, I'm a UX researcher, UX designer, mobile expert, love CSS, love Pixel, and today I mostly work in enterprise UX. For the rest, you can just Google me, basically. I wrote this talk because I was frustrated, to be honest. I've lost my... Okay, wait, give me just... Okay, let's do this without the notes, because I don't know where the notes are. Okay, good. So yeah, I was frustrated because I've been working in the industry for quite a while now. And today, a lot of websites are sadly still not accessible. And a lot of people think it's the job of the developer, you know, like we push things into production and we hope that eventually we will fix it later, like someone will fix it later, you know. My question is a little bit like my broken glasses here. You cannot fix broken glasses with duct tape. Even if it's amazing glitter duct tape, it's not going to work. So why would you fix something later when you can design it and build it the right way to start with? And for me, designers, we have a role to play here. A lot of accessibility issue can already be foreseen and maybe even prevented in the design phase. So today I want to focus on 4 main areas where designers can have an impact on the product, on the roadmap, on your mockups when it comes to accessibility. We're talking visual design, interaction and interactivity, navigation and wayfinding, and a little bit about content access. So when talking about visual design, of course, we are going to talk about colors. And the first thing we can do is be careful about our usage of color. So the first rule is make sure color is not the only way to visually convey an information. On my screen here, I have a navigation with categories, ingredient, material, and my accounts. At the top of the screen, the category is the current page. And the issue with my current design is that the current page indicator is going to, yes, here. The only thing that conveys this information that, hey, this is the current page, you know, it's the color, it's orange. If you're colorblind, you might have issues distinguishing between this orange here and the gray ingredient and material. So when I'm saying do not convey information only with the color, there's many different ways to convey information. So this is kind of my message to you is like, WCAG and accessibilities are just like rules for designers. And it's just yet another rule. Like we have Gestalt laws, we have UX rules, we have many of those. Accessibility is just like one other. But how do you implement that is still you as a designer. So in my example here, I've decided that to convey the information, I will underline it with a thing like 4 pixel border. That's my design decision. I'm sure that now as a designer, you're like, I would have done something else. I would have maybe like have something underneath it, like a dot or something. So that's the idea. The rule is do not convey information only with color. Then it's up to you as a designer to find a second way to convey the information. Then ensure that text and element have enough contrast. So we have something that is called a contrast color analyzer tool. There's many on the market. The one on my screen is only one example. What this tool does is you can take the text color, you can take the background color, and it's going to calculate a ratio between those two. So this is where we're interested into this little thing here. It's a number. And now the thing is, this number, we have rules about this number. So what are the rules? If we have text that is smaller than 24 pixels or 19 pixels bold, this little number in this other tool needs to be higher than 4.5. If you have big text that is larger than 24 pixel or larger 19 bold, then this little number here needs to be 3:1. So what you can do as a designer is like you can use those tools to check the contrast between the text and the background and make sure that it follows those two rules, 4.5 for small text, 3:1 for larger text. So this is for text. And then we have contrast ratio for non-text. So there's a couple of things. I'm going to give you examples. So one of the things that is non-text contrast is a user interface component that people need to identify. For instance, if you have form element. So on my screen here, I have an input type text, and it is like defined by a border. So here, what we need to check is that this border has enough contrast between adjacent colors. So we're not looking for the background only anymore. We're looking for adjacent colors. Here I made it easy. We have white on the right, white on the left. So what I need to check here is that this gray border has enough contrast between the white and the white. And here, what I want is at least 3:1. Same idea for focus indicator. So when people navigate using keyboard, they need to know where they are on the page when it comes to interactive elements. This is why we have these things that we usually have around buttons, links, all of that. And designers tend to redesign those. So if you are going to redesign those, you need to be careful. Your focus indicator, same rule. You need to have this 3:1 contrast against adjacent colors. So in my example here, I have the white on the left. The focus indicator is my gray, and then it's against white here in the middle, because if I didn't have the white around, it would be glued to the orange, and I would not have enough contrast between the focus indicator and the orange. So the reason here why I need some extra white between is to be able to pass this rule. And that's in terms of WCAG. The main reason is in terms of user experience, if the black was directly against the orange, you would be very hard to see. So in terms of user experience, the rule here is to make sure that you can actually perceive the components properly. And then last example for non-text is if you have graphical objects that are required to understand something in the page. So here I have an example of a cooking recipe again. I hope you're not hungry because all my examples are cooking recipe until the end of the talk mostly. So this recipe has some ratings. I have 4 stars that are filled and 1 star that is not filled. This is a graphical object. It's icons, and it conveys meaning, like the color here and the way it's displayed, it conveys meaning. It tells the user you have 4 out of 5 stars. So this rule also applies. And then again, I need to check this contrast. So adjacent color, like here we do not have anything in the middle of the star, so it's fine. It's the orange against the white. And then since this star is a border, same idea, orange against white and orange against white. So really, this rule is about making sure that interface component and things that are important for your user to understand, if you're using color to convey it, we make sure that everyone can actually perceive it and interact with it. So what can we do as designers? Well, usually what you want to do is in your style guide, in your design system, document those kind of things for the developers, like document the states, especially if you have like buttons, links, things like that. Document what is the focus state going to look like. so that developer know exactly. And of course, make sure that when you are going to design that, you have sufficient contrast. And then we have the rule for the link. So we have a 3 triangle rule. We need our gray text against the white background to have a contrast ratio of 4.5. Here we have it, okay. Then we need the link to have a contrast ratio of 4.5 against the white background. We have it. Since we did not underline the link, we also need to have 3:1 as a contrast ratio, so the one in the middle of my triangle, between the link here and the non-linked text. The idea is again against the same. If I'm a colorblind person, I might not be able to perceive this link because it might look the same as the text around it, so it might be annoying. So here it might be tricky because maybe you could make the black darker, or maybe you could make the orange lighter. But if you start making the orange lighter, then eventually it will have less contrasts with the background. Yeah, seriously, just underline the links and call it a day. If you underline the link, then it's not only conveyed by color, it's also conveyed by the underline. And then you are fine, good to go. Usability best practice, and also better for accessibility. Otherwise, you need to check your contrast. What we can do as designers also is when we are working on a new project, or when we are documenting colors in our design system, we can build and document our accessible color palette. So I think I could do 2 hours on how to build a color palette that is accessible. I'm going to give you the very, very short version, which is a trick that I really like. Is usually in a color palette, you have your main colors. So on my screen here, I have a color palette that we call Mermaid color palette for a friend of mine, where we have a kind of pink, purple, blue, and kind of green or aquamarine, if you prefer. And those are my main colors. So when I'm going to build that palette, I have my main color in the middle, and I'm going to have shades that are lighter and shades that are darker. So my trick is, when you're building those shades darker and darker, make always sure that you can always use your darker color with your lightest and with white. So what I do is I make sure I have always 4.5 contrast ratio between dark and lightest version of the same shade. This way I know that I will always be able to use those 2 colors together for buttons and things like that. And then there's one tool that I really, really like to help other designers understand what color can they use together on a project. It's called Contrast Grid from Shape. And I put the link in the chat to my article, so you can find this directly in there. But it's a little bit overwhelming the first time you arrive on this. So let me zoom in to make it a little bit easier to understand. So on my screen, I have a grid where I have all the colors at the top and all the same colors on the left. Now what I'm interested into is when you do the intersection on those 2 colors with such contrast grid tool, it gives you directly the contrast ratio. So if I were to use my purple, which is the darkest purple, with my lightest purple in here, it says directly that I have a contrast ratio of 5. So I usually use that and either put the link in the Figma file, or I like copy paste this whole thing, because with that I know exactly if I'm going to combine color later in the project, which one can I use together. I just need to check the intersection, and everywhere where it's white, it means no, you cannot use those 2 colors together. You will have contrast issues. And then what I also really like with this technique is that eventually you can use that also to adapt your color palette, sorry, for dark mode. So if you think about focus indicator, the black one is going to work on the white background. Problem is, it's not going to work anymore once the background is darker. So think about that when you're building your palette. If it's going to be used on a dark mode, or if you will have areas on a website that will be on a dark, maybe you will need to change. So in this one, the link was violet, sorry, in the light one, and then we switched to purple to have enough contrast ratio. So think about the regular one, but also think about all your different modes. And then last thing I usually do is I document in the design system what colors we can use together for our statuses. So most of the time when you have colors, you have your grays, you have your accent color, like the brand identity color, and then you have your utility colors, like statuses. Usually it's a shade of green for success, a shade of yellowish for warning, a shade of red for what did you call that? Issue errors, and sometimes a shade of blue for information. So on our project, we use the material UI. The namings are very, very weird. It's the one from the developers from the material UI, but the idea is the same. For one color status, so let's say the green, I know that I can always use the dark on the lightest or the dark version on some white, which means that I can build stuff like that. And then also the developer can automate that. They have, I don't remember how it's called in React, but basically they build this once and then they use just like the whole color palette to say, always use dark on this thing here. It's called palette success contract text, as I say. Name is weird, but yeah, that would be the idea. Always like this trick of saying you can always use those two together, either with text on dark background or with dark text on light background, and then we are sure we will not have any issues with those. Let's talk quickly about text and typography. There's not many things designers can do because this is more like a technical criteria, making sure that people can basically zoom in. But that's a little bit the same thing as Sarah just said, which is make sure that the text content can be enlarged to 200% without hiding elements and missing functionality of the website. So here I would say this is a technical criteria, but as a designer, I would push developers to test their website and tell them, okay, test this at 200%. Normally, if they did responsive web design the right way, it should work. For native application, though, it's a little bit more tricky because we do not always have the concept of responsive web design. So what I sometimes do for native application is that I'm going to use a Figma plugin to enlarge my text, like double the size, and then it's going to show me what it looks like. So usually the tricky part is if you have small text in columns. So back to my cooking recipe example here. What I'm conveying to developer is that if the user use the accessibility feature on their phone to enlarge the text at 200%, the prep, cooking, serving cost that is in 4 columns is not going to fit. We will have issues. So what they want to do is they want to code this in a way that we switch the grid from a grid of 4 to a grid of 2 by 2. Another thing I'm usually telling them is sometimes you do not need to make the visual twice the size. So in my example here, I didn't change the size of the the picture of the pizza, but again, back to my little stars, the 4 out of 5 star rating is an important information. If when the user makes the text bigger, this were to stay smaller, we might have a problem. If they make the text bigger, is because they need it to be bigger. So if I have like icons that are important for the user to understand, then I also tell the developer, okay, these icons specifically, we need to make them twice the size too. Otherwise, user will not have a great experience when they make this text bigger. So that's pretty much covers it for visual design. So it's mostly about colors. And if you can already cover your colors, trust me, there's a lot of websites out there who do not even have enough contrast ratio. So that would be a very, very nice start. Then let's talk about interactions and interactivity. So button and links. For button and links, it's more about UX copy. It's about making sure that when you're creating buttons in your mockups, they are clear and people can understand it. So when you're creating buttons, ask yourself, does my user understand what will happen if they click, tap, interact with it? Nick Delado has amazing content on UX writing, and I've borrowed a couple examples from him. So in my example at the top, they have this button that says "Find My Panama." Cute, amazing. Do you know what's happening if you click on "Find My Panama"? Well, maybe, but if you have a cognitive disability, you might not. So that's kind of fun copy. Problem is it's not very clear. So prefer something like search no. And I know it's boring copy, but trust me, like button is not the place where you want to have something fun. You want to have something very, very clear for your user. Same for a call to action that says keep me in the loop. There's people who do not understand figure of speech. So keep me in the loop, very hard to understand for some people. What does this thing do? Well, it sends me text alerts. So use a copy that says send me text alerts, and then the user understand what is going to happen in there. And then you want to avoid the click here without context. Users who are using a screen reader can navigate a web page using a feature that is listing all the links. If all your links say click here, the screen reader will be like click here, click here, click here, read more, read more, read more. Yeah. So remember the image annoying? Yeah, that's the same idea, but for links. So avoid that. If you have a sentence, for instance, for more information about Husky Athletics, click here. Avoid doing that. Put the link directly where it belongs. So here on Husky Athletics, which would mean for more information, see Husky Athletics. I would even argue that I might put the link on the whole thing, but this is where I would say, okay, that would be interesting to test that with screen reader. Would it be better to put it on the whole thing or only on Husky Athletics? So that's one of those occasions where like, yeah, do some tests with screen reader users on this sort of things to see how usable it is. And then we're talking about size. So there's a new WCAG criteria about target size that says that you need to check the size of a clickable, tappable area, and it needs to be at least 24 by 24 CSX pixel. It doesn't apply to link in block of text. Otherwise, it will be a mess with line height. And there's a trick with that, which is if it's not 24, you can use spacing around it to reach it. So how do you check if this passes? You draw a little 24 pixel circle on your target area. So in the case of my example here, I have a list of icons. The first one have 24 pixels, so that passes no problem. The second ones, the icons have 20 pixels, but we have 4 pixels between them. If you draw a circle, the circle will not overlap, so this passes. If you have the 20 pixel icon, in my third example, without the 4 pixel between, the circle will overlap, intersect, this doesn't pass. So it's very weird, but the idea here is to say someone with a motor disability might not be very, very precise. Someone might use a head stick, for instance, which is something they have on the head to point on the screen. Again, not very precise. So in order to make sure that people have a good user experience when they're using your website, if you have too small targets, then they will make mistake and they will click on it by mistake. So this is the kind of WCAG rule to say if it's at least 24 by 24 pixel or less, but you have enough spacing around it, people are less likely to make mistakes. So it should be easier to use. Then about forms and inputs. The first guideline I can give you is make sure that all the fields have a clear, easy to understand, visible label. So in my example at the top, I have username, and then I have the field, password, and then I have the field. Sometimes for reasons, you do not want to have a visible label. I honestly cannot find another example of this than the search. Often a search field is at the top of the website, and you might want to save some space by not having the search label. You still need programmatically to tell your developer, hey, I'm hiding the label here, but you, my friend, you need to convey that label to a screen reader. So even if I do not put it in the mockup, please code that in a way that the screen reader will still read that as search, so that the screen reader user have this work for them as well. And then the label is not a placeholder, because placeholders are not read properly by most screen readers, and also it's not the intention of a placeholder. A friend of mine was explaining that a form is like a board game. You must explain the rules at the beginning, otherwise nobody can win. And it's quite true, actually. So the goal with form is display instruction at the beginning of your form, not at the end. Otherwise, it will be very, very annoying. So here again, what can you do as designers? You can help users fill the form. So there's two ways of doing that. You can help them prevent errors. So you can tell about expected formats, instructions, which fields are mandatory. And then if they make a mistake, an error, you can help them recover. So you make sure that you have error messages, that the field is marked as an error, the message is clear, that you do not use only color to convey this, your error. And the last thing is avoid redundant entries. Don't make user input the same information twice, unless it's for security reason. So, for instance, if you're into a checkout process and you put your shipping address, what you want to do, for example, you could have a checkbox that says use the same as invoicing address, and then the user doesn't need to type it again, something like that. So I want to give you a very nice example of what not to do. First, we have placeholders as label. So it's a form field to create an account. First name, surname, email, country, accept the membership, agree to receive great tips, offers an invitation by email, and I would like to receive information via SMS. What is mandatory in here? Well, since I'm creating an account, I would assume email at least. And yeah, I think maybe accept the membership, but yeah, I have no idea. Honestly, it's not marked. What is mandatory? Everything except the SMS information. Well, why do I have to click on the button to know that I need to fill everything? This doesn't make sense. So again, this is about here, the rules of the game are told me after I've already lost. Do not do that. Very annoying for accessibility. So what you can do as designers, usually what I do is I document my errors in two ways. I have on the left here an example of a select with different states, including error states. And here it's very generic. We have a little icon and we have message. So that's for the design system. And then when I'm using the component in the page, I'm going to document in detail the actual error. So this here I have a component with input type text, which is for a date. And what I'm explaining here to the developer is if a user enters something that is not a year with 4 digits, and if users enters letter in that field, we trigger this as an error. And then we have an exact error message that says, please enter a year number, for example, 2022, something like that. And then, of course, you have all your documentation for interactive states, for checkboxes, radio buttons, default, focus, check, disabled, etc., etc. So do not forget about those. Very important also, so that the developer can build them properly. Let's focus on keyboard support now. So for the keyboard support, the first thing that usually designers are not aware of is skip links, because it's invincible on most websites. So a skip link is a link that is the first thing that gets read and focused on the page, and is a link that lets the user bypass a piece of repeating content. So in my case of my cooking recipe website, my skip link is a link that lets the user skip the logo, the whole navigation, the search, and go directly in the main page. So what you can do as a designer is you can design this skip link. You can decide, do you want it to be always visible? Some websites have them. Some websites have skip to content always visible in the header. Or do you decide, okay, no, it's not always visible by default, but when the user arrives and tabs on the page, so uses keyboard navigation, then it's the first thing. And then you design what does it look like it's a button, I have the focus ring, all of that. So do not forget about those. Very important for a lot of users. And then Sarah mentioned a little bit the focus order for the data visualization. focus order at page level is also very important. So what you want to have is make sure that the focus order follows logic and flow of the page. If you have a blog post, it's not that complicated. So I'm not saying you need to document that for every single website. But if you have something as complex as a SharePoint screen that I have on my screen at the moment, well, developer might be interested into knowing how to implement that when it comes to focus order. So in this example, we start at the top left, we go through the whole first part of the navigation. Then we go into a second area, so 9, 10, 11, 12. And then from the 12, we go in the navigation with all the links. We have a chance to go back to SharePoint Classic for some reason. And then we enter into the area where we have all the little actions. And in the end, we are entering this area with the table elements. So usually you can use annotation to do that. There's a very nice plugin that is called A11Y Focus Order by the Microsoft team in Figma. If you're not in Figma, you might have to do that manually. So for me, if you have complex pages with complex focus order, or if you are like me working with very, very complex pop-up with tons of information in there, it might be interesting again to annotate this. So in the case of a component, again, what's the focus order for all those elements? We start with the it's hidden, but it's the cross to close the pop-up. We enter into the first field, and then we go through all the checkboxes from left to bottom, from left to right, top to bottom, enter into each section. And then we end up at the bottom with the cancel and the add buttons. And then we have complex interaction and alternatives for complex movements. So for accessibility purposes, you want to make sure that user can navigate and interact with all components using different pointing and interaction devices, meaning you need to support mouse, touch, but also keyboard. The way I'm preparing that and the way I'm doing that for my developer is when I have a complex component. So in the example of my screen, I have a drop-down that is my icon where I have my card, my orders, and my details. Such a component, I will document what we call interaction flow. So how does this component work with the mouse? We hover the thing, it becomes orange. The user clicks on it, it opens it. Then when we hover some of the element, it becomes orange. And when we click on it, it opens the page. That's for the mouse. And then we duplicate this documentation and we are documenting the interaction flow for the keyboard support. How do we open it? Enter space. How do we close it? We bind it on escape. What happens next? User can navigate through the three options using up and down. And then when they press enter, because those are links, we open the page. And now the developer has a full documentation on how this is supposed to work for mouse and keyboard. And of course, you do not have to do that on your own. If you do not feel comfortable as a designer, you might seek the help of developers who know about keyboard accessibility or other designers or someone in your team. But that would be the idea. Then another thing is if we have either multi-points or path-based gesture, we need to provide a single point gesture alternative. So multi-point is if you use two fingers, usually like a pinch and zoom, for instance, or like on the iPad, you have things where you can use 3 fingers, rotate, all of that. These kind of things are complicated to do for people with motor disabilities. Same for path-based gesture, like following a path that is very narrow and very specific. For example, in Gmail, you can archive an email by swiping on it. Swiping following a very specific path is considered as a complex gesture because if you deviate from the path, it doesn't work. So here, you would need alternatives. Gmail has actually 2 alternatives. The first one is you can do a long press, and when you do a long press on an email, it switches into this mode where you have the archive, delete, and mark as unread button at the top. So that would be one alternative. The other alternative is like if you open the email, you can archive it using the archive button directly. So the alternative needs to be a single, how could we call it, like a single press or a single pointer gesture, but it can be more steps. In the case of opening the email, it's like 2 steps: is you click and then you archive. So you do not need to have the alternative be the same number of steps as the gesture, but you need to have an alternative. Same for drag and drop movement. So drag and drop movement, whether you're doing them with a mouse or you're doing them with a touch, it's a complex gesture, and some people with, again, motor disabilities, for instance, they might not be able to like click, hold, move it precisely somewhere and then release. So you need alternatives for that. I have a little example of a documentation for fake demo where we are ordering my favorite Pokemons. So by default, this component is built in a way where you can drag and drop if you want to say, I prefer Bulbasaur, you put it at the top and then it moves around. An alternative to that is you can keep your drag and drop, but what we do is we add buttons to each little Pokemon so that the user has a single press alternatives. So they can press up, up, up to move it up the ranking, down, down, down to move it down the ranking. So that's just like one example of how you provide a single pointer movement alternative for drag and drop. Where am I? So navigation and wayfinding. This is about making sure people understand where to find the things and navigate in an easy way. So it's about information architecture. One thing you can do as designer is making sure your headings, so H1, H2, H3, are descriptive, clear, and accurate. You want to make sure you describe the contents properly. You also want to avoid using paragraph with a bigger font. If you want something bigger, use HNs, so kind of follow the real structure and hierarchy, and don't use illogical order. So my advice here is, instead of starting the page in Figma or any design tool, I would say think about your content up front, think about your information architecture, think about your structure, work with UX writers, work with SEO people, so that when you arrive in Figma and you start designing the page, you already know how the heading structure will work. It will make it way easier to design. And then you can do stuff like that. You can actually document this. So I have in my design system library, I have components where it's just a little arrow when I'm saying to developer, this is an H1, on the cooking recipe website. Ingredient is H2, and then preparation step is H2, and then each step is H3, etc., etc. It's just about like really documenting this in case they need help. So last thing is about content access. The first thing is image, icons, and screen reader content. So if you have images that are not decoration, you might want to tell your developer what the alt text should be. So this is an example where you would document this in mockups directly, but of course there's many other ways to document that. So what I'm explaining in here, again, my cooking recipe website, is that my screen reader for my gigantic image of a pizza should announce slice of pizza with a lot of melted cheese, tomatoes, tomato sauce, ham, and green olives. And then here, on the right of this one, I have 3 buttons: save, share, and rate. Each has an icon. But the thing is, there's a label too. So what I'm telling to my developer is that actually those, I'm considering them as decoration. I do not want the screen reader to announce them. Otherwise, it would be annoying because the screen reader will already announce save, share, rate. So we do not need more. This is decoration. So not only am I documenting what should be announced, I'm also documenting when something should not be announced. The opposite example now is if I do not have labels. So here I have another component, I have a tile, and user can switch from a graph to table in this tile. Here currently we are into the table view. We have this little toggle. Well, we do not have any labels. So here in this case, we need to announce what are those icons for, because they are basically replacing some text. So here I'm documenting that the first one should announce view graph, and the second one should announce view table, so that a user who doesn't see the icon still has information. And then coming back to my rating, here, if I visually see the page, I understand that I have 4 out of 5 stars. Nice. If I do not see the page and I have a screen reader announce the page, what I would like this to announce is the actual meaning of this. So I don't want this to announce field star, field star, field star, field star, empty star. It would be very annoying. What I want to announce is what is visually conveyed. These things as 4 out of 5 stars. So what I'm telling to the developer is that this component here should actually announce the rating. I do not want to announce each icon separately. These belong together. So assistive technology should say rating X, meaning the number out of 5 stars. Then about audio, video, and moving content. So if you have pre-recorded videos, you want to have captions. If you have audio like podcasts, you want to have transcripts. Here, as a designer, your job is, of course, not to caption all the videos and to do the transcript of the podcast. But if you're designing a website that has podcasts, you need to think about a place and a way for users to access the transcript. If you're designing a video player, you need to think about how will people access captions? Like, what would the caption look like? Things like that. So as a designer, if you're working with multimedia content or as a multimedia content provider, think about such things. Then if you have live audio, again, you should have captions. So if you're working, I don't know if X/Twitter still has the options, but they had the sphere thingy where it was basically live and they used to have a live caption. So here someone had to design this thing. Someone had to design a place to have the caption, how to switch it on and off. And then if you have pre-recorded media, you also need either audio description or an alternative that describes what is happening in this. And then again, as a designer, you are not going to do that yourself, but in your player, so those little icons at the bottom of the player, you need to think about that. You need to think about the way for people to access such things. So here for me, when it comes to multimedia content, as a designer, you need to think about the mechanism and you need to push that on the roadmap. If you're working at a place where you have like video, audio things, like try to push for captions, try to push for those features. It's very, very important. And then the last thing is about orientation. Make sure you support both portrait and landscape. So here as a designer, again, not much you can do. You can just like go to your developer and say, hey, look, we need to support that. Please test it to make sure it's working properly. And if you have like animations that automatically starts and lasts more than 5 seconds, you again need a way to pause them. So if you're a designer working for a company where a slider and your client is like, yay, I want auto-rotating sliders, you need to design a way to stop it. So you need to design a pause button. And then you must explain very nicely that we cannot like keep the slider rotating forever. We need a pause button. Otherwise, we'll have accessibility problems. So to wrap up, this is a lot, but it's just a baseline. It's the minimum designers can do to make products accessible. It won't be enough, but it should help avoid a few issues already. And then again, it's a baseline. It's technical compliance. Don't forget to actually test the things with real users, with real disabled users, to make sure that it's not only accessible, but also usable, which is the next step. So I'm going to leave you with this challenge. What is one thing that you can do tomorrow to start improving accessibility? Anything. Pick one small thing. It might be just like, okay, let's check 3 colors on the website. Something as simple as small as that. Start with that, with your team, because you need to start somewhere. And then build upon that. So build upon this space. At the end of the day, accessibility is a team's job. Project manager, they can push accessibility by making sure that we have accessibility as part of definition of done, as part of requirements. UX researchers, designers, We can make mockups accessible. UX researcher, we can test those with different people and disabled people. Devs, accessibility experts, they're the one who will have to code it to make sure it technically works. Content SEO, UX writer, I've told you a little bit about UX writing. So those people can also help a lot when it comes to content, alt text, information architecture, button links, all of that. And then QA testing team, the people who test the website, they are also part of the whole journey, and they need to actually test with a screen reader, test with keyboard navigation, test it. And that's basically all I have for today. So thanks a lot.
Wow. Just wow, Stephanie. Thank you so much. That is, like you said, a whole wealth of information in there. And I know it's a lot for me to take in at once, but you're just chock full of practical advice in there. I really thank you for it. Now, one of the things you said up front that I really like is that accessibility is more than just the developer's responsibility. Specifically, I like it when you say you must explain the rules at the beginning, otherwise nobody can win. I thought that was very poignant. There's design, there's content, there's marketing, there's QA, there's all kinds of different disciplines in here. What sorts of things can teams do to rally around an accessibility from the start mentality?
For me, it's we are going back to the lack of, I think, visibility and accessibility, but also like a lot of people do not even know about that. So I think like we need people who are curious, who attend meetups like that, and then come back. What there we like? Let's say next Monday, I was like, oh, by the way, I've discovered that maybe we can start small, you know. So I think it needs to come from both sides. It needs to come from bottom to top. And usually this is why we do meetups and all of that. And then, of course, once you start like saying, okay, we want to do things, eventually you need budget. You need budget for trainings and all of that. So then you need also top to bottom. You need to go to the people with the money, say, hey, okay, we've been like learning ourselves with blog posts and free meetups. Can we have trainings? Can we hire maybe an accessible expert to do an audit, something like that? So I think we need both approach, but we need someone to start somewhere and then like grow and grow and grow.
That's absolutely true. And that's actually my next question for you is that, being able to spot foreseen issues suggests that someone should have a good, solid working understanding of accessibility principles in the first place. So how have you helped yourself become more proficient to know these things for your own work? Like in other words, how can someone become more proficient with accessibility without getting overwhelmed by all the information that exists out there? Because obviously it takes time and it takes effort, and we have to have patience with ourselves at the same time, I imagine.
The cool thing is the accessibility community is full of amazing people who are more than willing to share. So there's a lot of good resources. We have the European Accessibility Act coming in Europe, and I expect that more people will share content about that. So I will say like start somewhere. There's I can send you a blog post with like links to books and like very beginner friendly level. And then from there, you will build upon. And it's Leonie Watson, who is accessibility advocate and blind user, who was saying it doesn't have to be perfect. It just needs to be better than yesterday. And honestly, the yesterday is pretty crappy. Like even the form, just the form rules on accessibility. Oh gosh, I'm like, I cannot wait for European Accessibility Act to come and to be able to legally complain to all of those companies. Because like just the form rules is a mess. So it doesn't need to be perfect. I would say start somewhere, build upon, be also open to feedback, because it will never be perfect. And then I would say if you can have,
Oh, go right ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, if you can have like some people with disability, like there's tons of other videos also on the web on how do people with disability navigate the web. And I think that's also very, very important, because there's a kind of stigma around accessibility, and that as they said before, sorry, we think we do not have disabled users, but everyone has disabled user. It's just that they either struggle and gave up and are not using your website anymore, or are still struggling. So I would say watch some videos of some people with different disabilities and understand how do they navigate the web. And you will be surprised about how shitty the web is. I'm sorry. That's a
you
fact.
cannot swear on these things. No, just kidding.
What?
Just kidding. No, no. What you're saying is, be better than yesterday. I think that's solid, practical advice there. I know that when I was expecting my first child, I was really worried about what it meant to be a good parent, even. And where do you even start with knowing how to be a good parent? I had to ask someone, someone who had kids, hey, what sort of things do I need to do to be a good dad? He goes, well, you don't need to be just a good dad, and you don't need to be a perfect dad. You just need to be better than your dad, maybe like 10% better than your dad is. And I'm like, oh, that makes a lot more sense, and that seems a lot more doable than just being perfect, right?
Yeah.
So what you're saying there is very practical. Thanks for that. That's very refreshing to hear. Someone did put in the chat in there. What do you think about putting placeholder inside the inputs if they're not descriptive? For example, having a label that says email and the placeholder that also says email at the same time. Is that a bit redundant?
I don't know. I'm not a screen reader user, but from a cognitive point of view, I would say that if you have a form that is filled with placeholders, there's a chance that some people with cognitive disability will think the whole thing is already pre-filled, and they might basically miss some of the some of the field that they need to that they actually need to fill. Also, the problem with placeholder is you make them light gray, but then they do not have enough contrast, so they are very hard to read. So you make them darker, but then again, they look like a field. So I'm sorry, it's not that I don't like placeholder. It's just like after years and years, I'm like, I do not think there is a case for placeholders on the web. Also, they vanish. So people are like, yeah, but you can use it for formats. And again, you start typing, the format vanishes. And I had the issue where I have my, what is it called? I have a tool to pre-fill some stuff, and it pre-filled, but it pre-filled wrongly. And then I had errors, and I did not understand the error because it was a format issue, and I had to empty the fields to see the format because the format was conveyed in a placeholder that vanished. Yeah. Do not start me on placeholders. So I'm sorry, people. I do not see a usability, a case where placeholders are not either an accessibility problem or a usability mess.
Exactly.
But if someone has a good, I'm curious, but so far, it's always been an issue.
Oh no, I see it right there in the chat too. Lizzie says here, if your labels are semantically developed, the placeholder isn't even needed in the first place, which is a very valid point inside of there. Although there is that visual cue. There's another question in here: is ADA different than WCAG?
What is ADA?
Oh, I'm sorry. That might just be a U.S. thing, the Americans with Disabilities Act. The difference being, that's a codified law in the United States versus, WCAG, which is a set of guidelines, right? Yeah.
It will be the same. ADA will be like, I think, the European Disability Act. It will be the equivalent, and WCAG is the guidelines that you are supposed to follow.
Yes, absolutely. So WCAG isn't necessarily legally binding unless that's codified inside law itself. But whereas something like the Americans with Disabilities Act, that's something that you could be penalized for, and that is where you could be legally on the hook for inaccessible experiences. Is that the right understanding? Like legal versus guideline.
Yeah, one is the law, the other one is how do you kind of apply the law, kind of.
Yeah.
So they're linked.
I've just got one other question that I had as I was, taking notes off of what you said. We have these different disciplines and that are working together, and we need, good common language to make sure that we're addressing, things from the start, so we don't have to fix them later down the road. Say you're a designer, or not a designer. Let's just say you're a developer and you receive a design from a designer, and you notice something that might be an accessibility concern. What's the best way to push back on that, or do we push back on that at all?
I would say, I would love to say you need to talk to your designer, but I also know that sometimes like the development company is not the same as the design company, and you just get stuff that is shipped. So then I would like try to escalate this to say, look, we might have a problem here. Can we talk to the designer? Can we negotiate to have them rework that so that we can make it more accessible? So I would say, yeah, communication is the key. Maybe the designer doesn't know anything about accessibility and you just told them something super interested and then they will get better. So yeah, for me, it's always kind of every single like accessibility issue is also an opportunity to open a conversation. This is also why I like documenting accessibility as a designer, is because sometimes you have like designers who arrive on your team who do not know anything about accessibility. They see the documentation and they're like, oh, why this and why that? So like, oh, let me explain then. So for me, it's not so much pushback. It's about opening a channel of communication and saying, look, this is not working because that and that. Maybe we can find another solution.
Oh, that's phenomenal. And just thank you for everything that you've shared with us today. I know we'll see you back on the stage for the Q&A discussion panel.